It's always a pleasure to be here with you. Hello, everyone. Welcome to the African Podcast TV. This podcast is about Africa regarding the political side, the historical side, the economical side, so many more. Each week, I deliver my best thought and analysis regarding Africa. Here are my guests. His name is Ovigwe Eguegu. He's a policy analyst at Development Reimagined and contributor the China African Project. Thank you so much, sir, for joining me this weekend on African Podcast TV.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Thank you. Sir, before we start, what is your thought about what's going on in Guinea? We wake up this morning saying what's going on in Guinea. Can you give us your thought about that, please?
Yeah, I think it's from all indications now, it's a coup because we've seen reports from numerous media sources like Al Jazeera being on top of the matter, showing that the president has been seized, although his location is not yet determined. But there was a broadcast on ROTG, which is like the major news platform in Guinea, where the coup leaders, particularly Mamadi, Doumbouya, was there and made confirmed that there's been a coup, and then he has dissolved the government, and the constitution has been suspended. So it's I think it remains to be seen if they will be successful in taking charge of the entire country, because mind you, there's been a coup attempt before, which surprisingly, Colonel Mamadi was the one who actually was one of the top people who repelled that coup against President Alpha Conde. So we don't know, because they're still fighting on the ground even to this moment. About 40 minutes ago, I was talking to a friend of mine who is in Conakry, and told me they were still fighting the ground. You have people celebrating on one part of the city of Conakry and other parts of the country, and then while the military, sub factions of the military, still loyal to President Conde, still trying to fight to regain control. So I think it's, by and large, we have to look at it from a perspective of the internal dynamics. And you being Guinean, you would know that Alpha Conde has not been the most unifying of president, because there's a UN, there was a UN warning to him, sort of to tone down the rhetoric on ethnic division, ethnic setting up, ethnic sentiments
Yes.
in Guinea. Recently, he passed a bill where he will be raising his salary, meanwhile reducing salary for the security forces, particularly the army. And then you also have to factor in the fact that the economics of Guinea under Conde actually been better, or it's been good. It's just that it's not trickling down enough. You're not seeing that it's not as inclusive as it were. So those internal dynamics are there, but we also have to look at coups in Africa historically come with foreign influence, and the foreign influence is still one of those. It's still one of the missing pieces if you look at the story now. So I think that remains to be seen. But most people are already looking at France as being, the power behind, or the foreign power, behind Colonel Mamadi Doumbouya.
Okay, talking about foreign countries, like you mentioned about France, because the most of the time, especially in West Africa, especially those countries who was colonized, and some still be colonized by France, they still blaming France. But do you think we have to stop blaming France and then start blaming our leaders? Because, for example, in Guinea, you have been seeing the president Alpha Conde, since he been in power, he don't wanna give up, he don't wanna move on. He still, after 10 years, he still went for the third term. So do you think that if he respected the constitution, that will not going to happen? We have to, I think so. Just what do you think about that? We have to stop blaming France. We have to start blaming our leaders, because if they stop doing those type things, I don't think so. These things gonna still happening. What do you think about that?
Well, I agree with you that we have to stop blaming France, because it's not only foreign influence that's our problem in Africa. We still have issues of responsible governance and leaders who actually exact real statecraft, right? But because we want to hold our leaders accountable doesn't mean we will not speak up against foreign interference in our internal affairs. So it's not an either or situation. It is what it is. Foreign powers, big powers, will always meddle in the affairs of small and weak states. That's how politics is. So, but notwithstanding, if we begin to have leaders that take governance very seriously, it reduces the opportunities that these foreign powers can exploit. For instance, if Conde had not pushed the third term agenda against the will of Guineans, I don't think we'll be where we are today. He probably would have gone out of office and of transition to a new democratically elected president. So that's very important to mention. However, you have to understand that in Chad, there was a quick coup that took place after the death of Idris Deby. The
Yes.
French were very very open about their support, for Mahamat Deby. That's Idris Deby's son. Nobody saw that as a major problem. In Cote d'Ivoire, Alison Ouattara, the president of Cote d'Ivoire, changed the constitution for a third term as well. Although the French came out to say, "Oh, we're not necessarily in support of a third term," but if you look at the situation there, you have to see that the relationship between Ouattara and France is the opposite of the relationship between Conde and France today. Alpha Conde has not been to France in about 2 years. That is very unusual for an African president of a country that was formerly colonized by France. So there were even reports that there were back channels network to repair the relationship between Alpha Conde and President Macron of France. So you have to look at these issues very broadly and from not just from the perspective of holding our leaders accountable. There are major issues that are current that are always major powers always at work when these coups take place. Not just because for example, France wants to execute a coup in Africa, but where you have a dissatisfied military that sees the relationship with France as an opportunity, because if France is not backing Conde, so the calculation is if we go ahead with the coup, it's very likely that France will not support Conde against us. Secondly, there's a question of international legitimacy that will also factor in as well. So the bigger the power that supports you, the more you can actually get international recognition very quickly. And if ECOWAS and other regional countries want to stand up against your junta, the bigger power will probably just tell them, don't worry, let's let this slide, just like we're seeing in Chad.
Yes, yes, that's a really interesting point you have been making, especially when you talk about Chad and then you talk about Ivory Coast, like Cote d'Ivoire. I understand that France have been, especially Emmanuel Macron, has been backing up Ouattara, and we see what's happening in Chad too. But I still believe that, and I think that the best thing is we have to start. Our leaders, African leaders, must change. They have to change because if they don't change, it's still gonna happen. I just want us to stop the most of the time blaming France or blaming some countries in the world. We just have to take responsibility as African leaders. I think so that will going to help us. So let's talk about our topic, China, especially someone who has been in that domain for a long time. So please, can you tell us more about the China African project where you work at, and how do you see the relationship between Africa and China?
Oh yeah, just a quick correction. I actually don't work in China Africa project. I'm a contributor. I write articles and publish, and publish articles there. That has been my relationship with China Africa project. I actually don't have an employment with the organization. So it's development reimagining the consultants that actually do work for. So that aside, I think the relationship with Africa and China is a very interesting relationship. It's perhaps one of the most important relationships when we're talking about Africa as a whole and the rest of in its engagement with the rest of the world, because we're looking at a country that has exceeded expectations given how it has risen from 1949 to 100 years later, or about roughly 100 years later. We've seen a very very strong power that is very competent in a vast array of areas. And when we not narrow it down to our relationship with that country, we have to look at the numbers. For instance, China Africa relation economically is perhaps Africa's most important economic relation. It's our biggest trade partner. The EU is second, but the EU is not a country; it's more like a bloc,
Mhm.
right? So all of and then there is also the, I would say, the political dimension of China Africa relations. If we go back to when the People's Republic of China replaced Taiwan in the United Nations, you have to look at Africa's votes to see how well overwhelmingly Africa supported. China was, I think it was 76 or thereabout. We had about over 30 African countries voting in favor of China replacing Taiwan in the United Nations. So that has been, so if going to there's a historically political ties between Africa and China that can be explained through the shared solidarity vic, of being victims of imperialism, as it were, and then over time that morphed to have a very strong economic relationship, which we're seeing today. Yeah.
Yes, yes. In my opinion, I think so. If we're talking about China, relationship between China and Africa, especially nowadays, we definitely have to talk about the economical side because that is the most important thing between China and Africa. And I understand that. Just I want you to explain again to my view, especially talking about China and Africa relation, the economical side, because if we talk about that, we have to talk about the debt because everybody talking about the debt, what is going on, what is going on about the relationship between China and Africa. So, in your knowledge, please, can you explain to my viewers what is debt trap and what is your view about the debt on the continent?
Yeah, I think the debt trap narrative, it's a bit funny because if we look at African countries, today, I don't think we are as concerned about the debt we owe to China as certain countries in the West, particularly the US, because majority of Africa's debt is still hold owned to to euro bond holders, as private investors, the World Bank and the IMF. So
Mhm.
it's only in a handful of countries that you find China's debt being very very significant. Angola is a very good it's a very good example. Zambia also, where uh, but we're looking at 55 African economies, and maybe no more than six actually have what we call serious debt distress, vis-a-vis their debts, to all people, to all creditors. And then inside that six, maybe less than five, or about five, really have significant debt owed to China. But how did we get to these debts? These debts started with we our indebtedness to China
So,
started with,
before
you know,
I'm sorry to
yeah, go
interrupt
ahead.
you. I'm sorry to
Mm.
interrupt you. Before you continue, I understand that the UA, have been like you mentioned between China and America, the debt is a huge. But just let's talk about Africa because if you see Angola or Zambia or Namibia or some country, if China keep giving those money, and then what do you think about the interest rate? And what do you think about the future if some country doesn't have enough money to pay back, and China is not gonna keep forgiving some loans because they did because of the regard of the COVID-19. But we definitely understand that China are gonna have more interest, even though they've been saying sometime that they forgive some debt. So what do you think about that? So can you get into it get into that much better?
Yeah, so of course there's been debt forgiveness. You mentioned Zambia, for instance. Zambia had debt forgiveness in 2020, 2008, 2009.
2015.
In fact, even before that, debt have been debt forgiveness, for China, not from China to Zambia, but not just Zambia, that also for other countries, as well. Not just debt forgiveness, also debt suspension.
Hmm.
Because of the COVID-19, for instance, repaying the debt became very very challenging for many African countries. So if you look at Chinese Foreign Minister Wang Yi's last visit to African countries, like in the DRC, there was an announcement of debt forgiveness that the DRC was supposed to pay back to China, but considering the whole COVID-19 pandemic impact on economics, it couldn't. So that debt was suspended. But let's go back to, like I was saying earlier, before you came in. How did we get to this level of indebtedness, or the amount of debt that we owe to all of these people? So particularly the debt in China is really interesting, because the debt has arisen because African countries saw the need to build infrastructure, and they began borrowing money from just about anybody. So, but particularly Chinese lending was easier to get because there were less restrictions on what to do to get the debt, the financing, and also, like I always say, no string attached, quote and unquote. But the infrastructure is needed to drive economic growth. So everybody keeps saying African countries are borrowing money, but how do you build your economy when you don't have roads, you don't have harbors, to export commodities that you probably are producing? You don't have railways, you don't have airports, you have zero infrastructure in most part of Africa. Just maybe the major cities will have some infrastructure, and we think we want to grow the economy. That's not possible. Growing your economy requires very critical hard and soft infrastructure, and that is why we've seen many countries really take on the opportunity of easier lending from China to build their infrastructure. A good example would be Angola. When Angola exited the civil war, nobody wanted to lend Angola any money for reconstruction. What did Angola? Angola went to China and said, you know what, we could give you oil, and then in return for you give us money for reconstruction. Now, if you go to Luanda today or other parts of Angola, you can actually touch what was done with Chinese financing in that country. But I'll probably ask you, what has Angola built with its IMF funding? The IMF has not financed a single railway in Africa since 2002.
Mhm.
you know so we have to look at the full picture of the infrastructure deficit in Africa is massive, and we can't even rely on China to fund the infrastructure deficit, because it cannot. There's so much more that needs to be done on the African side to see how we can actually generate the funding and financing from within, as opposed to just borrowing and borrowing. So I think that's the conversation we should be having, not necessarily whether we are borrowing. The issue is, what are we doing with what we are borrowing? So it's debt productivity and the quality of the debt, and then how can we exit borrowing and actually generate the money we need for infrastructure financing from within our own countries.
Yes, okay. Let's talking about borrowing again, or talking about having or no giving China giving us money, especially someone who is from Nigeria. According to Bloomberg, Nigeria own $81 billion to China than any other countries in Africa. And so, what do you think about that? If China keep, like I said, China keep giving us money, and Nigeria own that money to China. So, as someone who have knowledge, how do you think Nigeria can pay back to China that amount of money?
Yeah, so let's look at. I think it was last year or earlier this year, the Nigeria Debt Management Office, we call it the DMO here, published our facts and figures about our debts, in to everybody that we owe. So the total stock of Nigeria. Do you know how many percent of Nigeria's debt is owed to China? It's less than 4%. 4%. That is nothing compared to what we owe to Eurobond holders. It's nothing compared to what we owe to the IMF and the World Bank. So, like I keep saying, the big question we should be asking is, in many countries, if you pander to the rhetorics, you think we are just up in our neck in debt, when we're talking about China or just about any country. But if you really go look at the numbers, you'll be amazed.
Mhm.
Less than 4%. That's what we owe to China. But how are we going to pay back all of why not ask about how we're going to pay back the remaining 96%? But let's even look at the debt in total. How are we going to pay back our debt? We have to grow our economy. We have to make our economies more productive. export, because once you can export more, you earn foreign exchange, and then that's the best way you can actually repay your debt, as opposed to asking for debt restructuring, or what do you call that, debt forgiveness, right?
Mhm.
So if we do not, if we look at if we look at the debt to GDP ratio, which is almost seen as the benchmark for knowing whether an economy is healthy enough to keep borrowing,
Mhm.
you just have to look. Nigeria is not even up to 60, maybe at the most 60% of our debt to GDP ratio. Many African countries are way below, below what 70%. Meanwhile, if you look at many other countries like Italy, for instance, they are
Mhm.
way over 150%.
Mhm.
So, but they are still getting money from the EU. So I think the conversation we should be having, like I said, is how do we make our economies more productive, so that we don't have to keep borrowing from external parties, and then secondly, use the productivity to actually generate enough money to repay what we already owe. That's the major conversation we should be having. Yeah.
Okay, let's talk about trade between China and Africa again. According to the Minister of Commerce, trade between Africa and China increased by 40.5% in the first 7 months of 2021, and then that record of high of 139.1 billion that China received from Africa, about the trade between Africa and China, according to the Minister of the Commerce. So, what do you think about the trade between China and Africa? And do you think it's a win-win situation if you hear that from the Minister of the Commerce of China?
Well, I think when it comes to China Africa trade, that's where we have a major issue that we have to deal with, which is trade deficit. So, China Africa trade, according to the SARI, that's the John Hopkins School of Advanced International Affairs, I think. It says by 192 billion dollars. That's the volume of trade,
Mhm.
billion dollars as of 2019. That's a lot of money, right?
Mhm.
But the trade deficit between Africa and China is a major issue. Most African countries import more from China than they export to China,
Mhm.
right? So the major largest exporters to China are Angola, for instance, South Africa, and then the Congo, and the major importers, people who actually import more from China. My country, Nigeria, is number one, and then South Africa also, and then Egypt, right?
Mhm.
So when you have that much trade deficit, and if you're looking at the trade deficit, we want a case where we can export more to China, because, like I said, if we want economic productivity, more productive economies, it means we have to generate more goods, and those goods need markets. China is a huge market that we should be putting more of our goods into, to earn very valuable foreign exchange and trade. So Europe, the same thing. The US, the same thing. So for me, I think the what there's a lot of convergence that needs to be built around trade, with China, so that we see increase in volume,
Mhm.
total volume. That's one, but also particularly a remarkable increase in the volume of Africa's exports, to China. So like Kenya's avocado, more of that, for instance. We just did the research in my consultant development to imagine on how Kenya's avocado should it gives us a very good opportunity in China. There's growing demand for avocados in China, and Kenya is a major producer of avocado and has a lot of surplus that it can export. South African wines that can get more, into China. So there are many commodities, or products, not commodities now, finished products, exports, not just export of raw materials and commodities, but actually finished goods. Yes, how to get African brands into China. And of course, we expect that in upcoming forecast, African countries can actually sit with China and say, we are doing well in terms of trade, but we think we can do more. Particularly, we want to export more into China.
Okay, like really interesting point. Just like that. That my next question is: so, do you think that Africa should change their strategy or how to approach China, especially in the trade side? And why is that?
Oh yeah. So if talking about strategy again, we just even put out a document called the Blueprint, for Africa China's relations, and we went through just about anything you can think of. In I will send you the link so that you can put it when you're publishing article. It's a comprehensive assessment of Africa China relationship and looking specifically at how we can move, China Africa trade forward with emphasis on increasing Africa's access to the Chinese market. That is very, very important because we have a continent that is rich in natural resources, right? You have people working people in working age that can actually go into factories and work and produce finished goods, can also still go produce and get resources, work in mines and extract resources from the earth and export. But the problem, we have to realize in that in the 21st century, if you look at China's BROI, which is largely in place now, that has given China a lot of options when it comes to commodities like what oil. It can get the oil is get from Angola and Nigeria, for instance, from Saudi Arabia. You can get that same oil from Iran, which is much closer to China, right? Is it or even the various battery elements and metals and minerals that is the rave of the moment now? Lithium, for instance, you can get that from South America, just as you can get it from African countries, cobalt and the like. So if we keep looking at natural resources as a way to capture more of the Chinese market, it's a dead end because China has so much options. The emphasis has to be on finished products. For instance, China cannot get kente from Ghana from anywhere else, right? So
Mhm.
there's almost no competition. So if you have a trend in China tomorrow where maybe many Africans there they have greater demand for it, that automatically is going to boost Ghana's exports to China even more. So we're also looking at geographic indicators. So those are certain products that only come from a particular place. So they have several of them. Kente is one of those geographic indicators, special goods that you can only find from a particular country. Africa has a few of them.
Mhm.
How to increase, the demand for these geographic indicators and these special products in China is one of those things that African countries, need to look at. So going forward, and like we assess in that document, there has to be coordination within African countries themselves. Because if you have Namibia going straight directly to China, that's just one country. Look at the size of China. Look at Namibia. You can easily just you know walk around Namibia. But if you have, for instance, the ACDC as a block going face to face with China, saying this is what we want and this is what we think we can actually negotiate, with you. There's strength in numbers, but the problem is African countries don't use their numbers well enough. So that's something we have to do to be able to, to have a more concerted and coordinated approach to China, and then start pushing some of those strategies and recommendations that we have, in the blueprint. Like I said, for your view
Yes.
listeners, it will be very interesting for them to go see that document.
Yes, that's really that was my thought too. I definitely think that Africa should go to China as one, not as divided as Nigeria or Ghana. If we go as one, I definitely think that approach will help the African continent. So let's talk about the challenges, and the issues, because I definitely know that the relationship between Africa and China, there have been a lot of challenges or issues. So what are the challenges, and can you give us a few solutions about those challenges, how to overcome those challenges?
Yeah, so I think one of the big challenge for African economies right now, it has to be more physical space, right? So more physical space means uh, maybe more debt deferment and debt cancellation, but that might be a little bit challenging, because if you look at what's coming from China, they are saying let's use the G20 format. So the G20 came out with the DSSI and all of those mechanisms to ease the debt burden on low income countries after COVID-19,
Mhm,
impacted the global economy.
mhm,
So China is saying, let's talk about debt under that G20 format, as opposed to China Africa sitting face to face to just to discuss that. So I think that's still an issue. and to a large extent, you will not find anywhere where you have many of the you real bond holders and private investors saying they are forgiving this amount of debt or that amount of debt. So much so that the World Bank president David Malpass last year actually called out the private bankers and creditors like, you guys are not doing enough for African countries, and that's something that is not even being said enough. So we need the international community to understand that COVID-19 has impacted the continent of Africa remarkably economic wise, and that is making it very difficult for African countries to to have a kind of economic growth and revenue that they can then cough out enough to service their debt or even meet their debt commitment. So that's I think that is one of those major issues. Another issue will actually be trade, like I said. So we have so much that we can export to the world, not just like I said, not just in raw materials but in finished products, and we need to see how we can get China to support that our agenda to become more of a manufacturing economy. So I'm sure you probably might have known that last year in December there was the MOU between China and the African Union on the African Continental Free Trade Agreement. So those type of coordination, or actually initiative, should be should go on, but the priority has to be, how do we marry Africa's need to produce more and to become a more of a manufacturing part of the world with China's own growth as a big market that that is importing from that imports just about any goods that we can think of. So for me, I think the priority on trade is also very, very important, and things like the AFCFTA China BRI link up rather, it's very important that those conversations go on and progress, because we're looking at I mean, the whole of Asia would have 1 billion people in the middle class in just about a few years, and that's the huge market. And if we don't start thinking of how to increase Africa's share of that, not just China, now the entire Asia, we'll be missing out on a lot, and that's something and that cannot be emphasized enough.
So, like, in your opinion, people have been asking me that question, like, why China is investing more in Africa? Why is that China is investing more in Africa, or only like giving us that amount of money? Why is that? Do you think that is benefiting more Africa than China, or is benefiting more China than Africa?
Yeah, I think that way of looking at the question is very simplistic. You have to understand. See, if you follow China's arc, you see the moment FOCAC started, you begin to see that there was emphasis on China-African relations, right? But especially with the coming of President Xi Jinping of China, there was emphasis on China going global.
Mhm.
So China's investment or China's interest into Africa is not an exception. It's actually more representative of the norm. China is investing a huge amount of money in Europe. China is investing a huge in South America. Is investing in its neighboring countries in the whole of Southeast Asia. So it's not as if China is not investing anywhere and just putting all its money into Africa. That's not true at all. So the investment into Africa is part of a global trend that has seen China, so-called going global. All of their companies, Transsion that makes phones, Huawei, or construction companies. They're everywhere. They're not just here. They're almost everywhere. So that's not there's nothing unique about China investing in Africa. What I would say is unique, however, is China's uh, political relationship with African countries, and even that is not really unique. it's just that you find that in many African countries there is a growing, I would say, political relationship between the Chinese side and the African side. For instance, you find that with the ANC of South Africa, also with the ruling party of Ethiopia, even the ZANU PF of Zimbabwe, as well. So China is building infrastructure in South America, is building infrastructure in all across Asia, is building infrastructure in Africa. If anything,
I'm sorry to
the
interrupt
funding
you.
for infrastructure is actually reducing in Africa now, but less people are asking why. We always think people just want to come in and
Okay, okay,
fix it. But
and so
I understand that sentiment because of the history of colonialism. The West has done
yes,
that all over the world, so they think everybody wants to do that like them too.
exactly. I was, I just want to a little bit to talk about that. Do you think we are gaining more than China, or China is gaining more than us?
Like I said, that's really simplifying. You have to a relationship is what you make out of it. If you have if for instance now in this podcast, am I gaining from you more than you're gaining from me? It depends on how you look at it, and also it depends on what our motivation, motivation is, and what we're actually trying to get out of this interaction. That is how it is. So if African countries are just going to sit back and expect that one country is just going to come in and say, you know what, there's all the money you need to do whatever you want to do, and that's all. That's not going to happen. There is no free lunch international relation, international politics.
Perfect.
The
Okay,
question
perfect.
is, how can Africa get more from its relationship with China? Because the Chinese negotiators, they come in very ready, but on many occasions, African sides are not really ready, and they are not really doing enough in the negotiating room.
So before I let you go, so how do you see the future between the relationship between China and Africa? How do you see the future?
But yeah, again, it all comes down to what we make out of the relationship. Like I said, on trade, there is potential for increase and growth that will benefit African countries and benefit China, right? But if we do not find ways to get around that deficit and grow our exports, to China, or at least grow the value of our export, if we are not grow the quantity of our exports, no, but you can't really put it on the Chinese. They're not going to show you how to game them. We have to show the cunning and the same gameness that almost every smart power or country has shown, in the world. So the future of Africa relationship, of Africa-China relations, is as much dependent on Africa as it is dependent on China.
Anything else would you like to add before I let you go?
Yeah, no, that's all for me.
Okay. Thank you so much for joining me this weekend on African Podcast TV.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you.